Well, let's talk about American and an American in England. This was basically incidental music for a sort of radio, a slightly sort of propagandist radio documentary which was broadcast from England to America to let the Americans know what it was like in wartime England, and presumably at the same time to kind of canvass their support.
Yes, I think it was a way of celebrating the fact that the Americans had joined the war, and a war that was miles and miles away from them personally, and it coincided with Britain's re-arrival back in Britain after a very, very dangerous journey across the Atlantic. And he set about, I think, trying to contribute something to the war effort. His speed was extraordinary. I think in really quite a short number of weeks, he'd written an enormous amount of very useful, practical music for this series of programmes. There were, am I right, there were 4 of them, 4 series, weren't there?
Yes, I believe so.
And different aspects of what it was like to be in Britain during the war, how people lived their lives, how they manifested their loyalty to the cause. And I think he realised that it would be marvellous to have very lively, engaging music as part of this, to enhance the whole idea of the programme. The advent of Peter Grimes was just around the corner, and he must have been thinking, how am I going to conjure these different scenes and these different atmospheres briefly, penetratingly, in theatrical music. And it somehow, he was like let out of school for a moment or two to write this music, and his orchestral imagination just poured out of him. You can see it in the way the different themes of the different programmes needed different musical expressions, some of them brilliant and energetic to reflect a lot of physical bustle, others more still, more poignant, more humorous. The whole business of describing the underground is really quite humorous, isn't it? And so we can find, just in brief sketches of music, what an amazingly versatile man he was.
Because, I mean, the opening piece, you listen to it, you think, actually, that sounds, that is so perfect for a sort of news bulletin. He's actually got that idiom, probably before that idiom was even invented.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. It's never too long, is it? And it just says what it needs to say, and it finishes in a very appropriate way so that the voice can come over the top of it. And I think we've captured that in this performance that we did.
Cranston, believed a prisoner of war, now known killed in action in Malaya on January the 11th, 1942. Captain J.L.W. Cranston, most dearly loved husband of Josephine and darling daddy of Emma and Hope, of Hapsfield House, New Malden, Surrey.
And at the heart of this, it's basically a suite. There is the women at war, and then there's this very, very poignant, slightly longer than all the other pieces, where the voice remembers the dead, and you can't help feeling, from what one learned about Britain later, that must have been incredibly poignant for him, because it sort of pointed up his loathing of war and the waste of war.
It's a lovely moment, isn't it? It's so different from all the brilliance of the other pieces. What I admire about it, actually, is the simplicity, that he just needed to find a few notes that would conjure up another world, used the harp. He needed a voice in the orchestra, and so he used some of the wind principles, particularly, of course, the first horn, who leads it all off. And he must have been so inspired by the person who happened to be playing it. A guy called Dennis Brain, I think it was, wasn't it? And it was their first meeting, and Brain was so touched, we can assume, I think, by the way he'd written for the horn, that he immediately asked him whether or not he could find a way to write a piece for him, and thus the Serenade for Tenor Horn and Strings was born, which is a lovely sort of anecdotal fact that came out of this very difficult for him time, arriving back when he had been dubbed a traitor, when he'd been dubbed as a coward, not doing anything to help the war effort. But he was certainly making up for it in a very quick time.
So you've worked with Sam West a lot in this kind of setup of voice and music.
Yes, voice and large orchestra, actually. I mean, he does smaller scale things often as well. But he's so sensitive to music, and he's a very, very skilled performer. And what I thought was lovely was his judiciousness in doing all the different accents that this Britten work demands, because he has to indicate to the audience that he's telling a story about this work, because it's completely unknown, and he has to make it clear that a journalist was sent over from America, who was of course an actor, and it was an American actor, so he would have had an American accent. But I think he was very clever in judging it and not making it too public, but making the impression that he was talking just to you personally. It seems to me that it's an unmissable opportunity to make a recording of this music now in this centenary year, because it shows such an important side of his skill as a craftsman as well as an artist. And NMC have put together some very unusual pieces of Britten's work as a way of celebrating his birthday. And I think that it can only enhance everybody's understanding of his vision of himself as a composer. As a very, very young man, I played for him when I was a student at Cambridge, and we went to do one of his least easy pieces for the concert hall, the Spring Symphony. And we'd rehearsed it in Cambridge, and then we went over to Orchestra, and he just did it on the one afternoon. And I can still picture him, what he was like, how incredibly easy he was, with us personally, but also with the business of conducting and doing a piece of his on one rehearsal. It didn't seem to worry him at all. And now we know that actually he was terrified, wasn't he?
Yes, absolutely.
And the world premiere of the War Requiem, you know, he said, I can't do it all, I'll just do with my friends over on the side, you know, and get someone else to do the big stuff. And he was a very nervous performer from that point of view, but none of that came through, I remember. This was the year before it burnt down, the Maltings.
Because he was a much greater conductor and a much greater pianist than one would sometimes credit him with. You know, on the occasions he performed other people's music, you suddenly thought, wow, you know.
Wow, he was marvellous, marvellous pianist and marvellous conductor. All the things I've heard of his, you know, of his conducting are just beautiful. And there's a naturalness and a flow about it. And I remember that, playing for him in the Spring Symphony. There was a lovely moment when he said, I wonder whether I could do this little bit again. I always find it rather difficult. And of course what he was really saying was, it wasn't very good, was it? It's quite tricky for you all. Let's do it again and try and get it right.
But that's wonderful conductor psychology, isn't it?
Marvellous. I've never forgotten it. I use it myself sometimes. I feel sure that this recording will show yet another side to his incredibly multifaceted personality. Because
it sort of fills in the little gaps amongst some sort of interesting works like, you know, the Franklin Variations, Les Illuminations, the violin concerto, the piano concerto. All these works are sort of coming between those, and you suddenly realise that actually lots was happening over and above, as it were, the ones that get the opus numbers in the end.
Yes, that's right. Music that he himself may have said, oh no, that was just for that moment, you know. But actually now, it's not only very enjoyable, but important.